So I'm talking about Mars in Gemini, as well as the Saturn Ketu in Sagittarius, and some other important configurations right now. So check it out. Okay, so we have some business here, right? With our Mars in Gemini, our Saturn Ketu stuff going on, and I'm doing an update here so that we can get down with it. Let me get my room set up here a little bit. So we should be set up, and you guys can also ask some questions at some point. I'll be all nice and friendly. You love when I'm friendly. So you can ask some questions later on. First, though, I did want to talk about a couple, important things that are happening especially with the Mars transit into Gemini. It's also going to be approaching Rahu. And I talked about these things at great length in my 2019 forecast. Actually, let me bring it up in case people haven't gotten that yet. And it's really important because it shows the I talked about this period of time during the year that is extremely crucial. And I talked at great length about how this Saturn Ketu was going to be dancing around for months. Jupiter poking his head in Sagittarius, then retrograde back into Scorpio. Again, we've seen all this stuff play out that I've been talking about, right? And it's going to continue. Okay, this year is really sort of front loaded toward this early part of the year. Huge shifts happening that are going to affect our life, not just this year, but our lives for a long time. This is a really, really crucial time that we're entering into with all of this energy. And so I wanted to, check in about this Mars, the entry of Mars into Gemini, because it's certainly the beginning or the real, sort of focal point of this time. It's now starting in great, in great detail. So you see the chart here, and just making sure it's centered correctly, which it looks like it is. And you have this, Mars just entered, and it's about to go into Ardra Nakshatra. Oh, this is May 22nd. Let me go back to where we are right now. So right now we're at May 14th. We're like right here, okay? So, right now the sun is about to go into Taurus. Of course, that's going to bring a shift into that quality, which is less of the independent. We could really feel things stabilize. That's my hope, at least. For about 30 days or so, with sun going into Taurus, it's going to feel more connected, at least wanting to be more connected to the earth and our values and things like that. Also, Mercury, Venus are moving here as well. You see Mercury will soon join the sun in Taurus on May 18th. And that will be also, bring more of that stability. Then Venus, a few weeks later goes into Taurus. This would be on this is on like June 4th. But by the time we start getting up through May and into June, we could start seeing some of this real difficult energy. First of all, again, Ketu Saturn are exact. And Mars winds up getting into an exact conjunction with Rahu opposite the Saturn Ketu, like exactly opposite. So right now, again, the Saturn Ketu is bringing a lot of this sort of stuck energy, sort of calcified energy, where especially around Sagittarius themes, which has to do with our beliefs and our, again, I said at the very beginning, and I've been saying for months that, around all of these, all of this stuck energy, this stuck kind uh, of beliefs and dogma and things like that. And this stuck sort of beliefs and dogmas are very big now, because we have this Sagittarius energy being sort of, influenced by the fears of Saturn and the kind of insistence of Ketu, which is like, I know it's true, it's real, I know it, I've experienced this before, and here it is again, and it's shown up again, and that kind of energy. I did a video from Joshua Tree, long video, about the Saturn Ketu issue right now, where the best way we can work with it personally, and what you can do personally, is to reach out to people who you feel have done wrong to you. This is always the best Saturn remedy, is forgiveness, humility, rather than feeling humiliated, which is Saturn, and angry about it, which is Ketu. Ketu is also seeing the futility in acting that way, because Ketu is where it realizes the mistakes of the past, because Ketu is also literally about a sort of been there, done that feeling. So it's like, yeah, I know, we've been there and done that. I've been there and done that. I've gotten all fired up about my beliefs and my belief about what's wrong and what's been wrong to me, and I've gotten all flipped out about it, and I know that ain't going to work. But what else, right? So there's this kind of feeling of deja vu, kind of like being stuck in a sort of revolving door around these kind of things. But the creative principle, again, has to do with compassion, forgiveness. The power of Saturn and Ketu have to do with solitude, meditation, introspection, and focusing on something very strongly, and something deep and eternal, beyond just all of the expectations that the world is going to work out somehow. We have all these hopes and expectations in the world, and the disappointments of that, and the disappointments that we got from other people, because that's where it all gets stuck. A lot of that is being revisited. So again, I talk about this quite a bit. It also can be showing where sort of teachings and teachers are having a little bit of crisis, and a crisis of faith here and there, and stuff like that. So you can watch the Saturn Ketu video that I did. What I also want to be talking about here, though, is this Mars in Gemini. It's also, again, starting this whole next trajectory. I want to talk about it in a mundane sense first. And again, I don't like making these kind of ominous predictions, but we have to see this. And I started saying it a while ago, and I did it in my 2019 forecast, that there's a lot of ominous potentials for war. I even think I said literally, like the potential for like war with Iran or Venezuela, or some country where, we can just even look at the people that the U.S. president has surrounded himself with, these damn warmongers, John Bolton and these other clowns, these neocon warmongers, are rattling the sabers and looking at what's coming up. Here we go. And then we're going to have a damn eclipse right after Mars passes Ketu. After Mars passes Rahu, around this time on June 12th. Again, June 8th, 9th, 10th, this could be some intense stuff. Again, we would look at this exact new moon, this right here. So June 4th, again, this, and then we get near, like around this time, and leading up to this full moon in Scorpio, like right around here, or actually the full moon in Sagittarius. But again, this period of time in mid-June is just, we could have some real difficult times coming. Let's hope it doesn't. Let's hope, cooler heads prevail in the world, and these things don't come to fruition like this. But again, even if it's not some declared war, like with another country from the United States perspective. There could be other outbreaks, other wars, or other conflicts that break out. Of course, explosive potentials of where other kind of military operations break out, Israel, and especially in the Middle East, and other kinds of operations. So this potential for war and conflict is really high now for the next couple months, for sure, at least through the eclipse, and then that eclipse. So here's the solar eclipse. It's happening. It's actually on my birthday, July 2nd, right on my sun. So again, we have this solar eclipse on this day in Rahu Nakshatra. Again, you can see how this is going to keep going. Then the Mars is debilitated. Then we keep this going with the debilitated Mars. And then we have another, debilitated moon. And then the next full moon is here. This is Guru Purnima. So that'll be auspicious. The Guru Purnima this year will be on the July 15th. I'm pretty sure this is Ashad, right? Yeah. So this will be a very auspicious day, July 15th, with this full moon in Sagittarius here, joined Saturn Ketu. But a lot of ominous potential coming up with this Mars Rahu in Gemini. This is not the greatest sign for Mars in the sense of being disciplined and fighting the good fight and all that stuff that we're trying to do with Mars, because it's in Gemini where we fight over ideas and rhetoric, and there's a lack of diplomacy, and there's frustration, and there's the man with the club who wants to beat on something. So aside from the mundane prediction of potential war or battle in your life, you could see that you want to be very careful the next couple months during this whole epoch, this whole time I'm talking about, with getting into battles, fighting with people, arguing, fighting over ideas, and rather than being disciplined. Again, this is how Mars works. Mars wants to be disciplined. It wants to be disciplined, and discipline is in actions. We have disciplined actions, meaning we're doing the thing we know that's going to make us strong over and over again, and we have a standard of being disciplined. Like, for example, anything that we've ever accomplished, it's because we had a certain discipline, a certain focus, and worked hard toward that focus. Even though it was difficult, we kept going and we persevered. Like your yoga practice, anything where you've made yourself strong, it's because you were disciplined, right? To do the thing that you know is right rather than just what is easiest. So again, that comes from having powerful actions. But Gemini is a sign of the mind and of intellect and of a bunch of different ideas. So when Mars is in Gemini, we tend to do battle over all these different ideas rather than staying focused on what we know is right and taking these powerful actions to make ourselves strong. So in the short sense, in a less wordy sense, you want to know that this creates a high potential for arguing and battling and struggling with others. So try to resist getting in any big fights and battles and struggles, even though there could be a lot of temptation. If you have a lot of planets in Gemini, like if that's your ascendant, or you have the moon there, or whatever, again, whatever house that falls in, that could be a big theme of difficulty for you. And again, I put the link there. I'll put it again because people often ask. But again, this is, if you haven't gotten the 2019 forecast yet that I did for all the signs, I definitely recommend investigating it, because you're going to be worked over by these energies, whether you know it or not. They're going to come, and you're going to be, wanting to know what to do about this kind of thing. Okay, and I talk about this a lot. 2019, this is actually a link to just the general 2019 forecast in general. So I explain the whole year, but then when you register, you'll get a link to, your personal forecast for that, and it's really important to understand. how these things are going to affect you individually. And so the other thing that's really important is that we have, the sign of Gemini, and it's something that's often really overlooked, but it's extremely important to understand, is that the sign of Gemini is actually the sign, more than any other sign, of relationship. Literally, the sign itself is called Maituna, which means, it literally is the word for sexuality, or for sexual intercourse. So Gemini is literally, more than any other sign, the sign of sexuality, intercourse, experimentation, pleasure in that regard. And it's literally a very masculine man and a very feminine woman. It shows this interplay between the masculine and the feminine that we're all grappling with here on Earth. We're all grappling with learning about our masculine and feminine. And through the sign of Gemini, it's the most developed, where Gemini is keenly aware of both sides of every issue. So it really shows the nature of the mind as being very masculine and very feminine. The symbol is a man with a club and a woman playing a musical instrument. So it's a very masculine man, almost brutal, and a very feminine woman. That's the sign of Gemini. That's the symbol. That's what, and those two forces are in, basically like a loving embrace, basically making love, this feeling, this spirit of Maituna, which is literally intercourse. So in the mind of a Gemini man or woman, there's a very strong masculine man and a very feminine woman. That's why you'll often see that the men, even if they're very masculine in some ways, they also have a very refined feminine nature, where they'll have an appreciation for things that are refined, for a refinement, like the arts, music, women in general. They'll be very in touch with that. In fact, the feminine side is much more developed, they're much more at ease with the feminine side, whether it's a man or a woman, because Venus, who is the woman playing the musical instrument, is a functional benefic for Gemini. It's a very easy energy for Gemini. That's why Gemini is very much very comfortable with the arts and music and a very refined aesthetic, enjoyment, beauty, happiness, of course, pleasure, of course, sex. The sign is Maituna. So they're very comfortable with the Venus part of life, man or woman. But then there's also the man with the club. And again, we have a woman playing a musical instrument and a man with a club. It's not a man who is a yogi or a man who is a king. That's a powerful masculine. It's a man with a club, which is that's not a symbol of the most evolved man. It's of the kind of like a caveman. So Gemini is kind of like a very sensitive, refined artist, female side, and a kind of even perhaps brutal masculine side. It's not always brutal, but it just shows that it's not even just two archetypes. It's not just man and woman. It's refined woman and masculine, almost brutal man. So I'm talking about this because it's not just because Mars is there, but Rahu is also there right now. And Rahu will be there for the next next year and a half. And this is really the time for us, men and women, masculine and feminine, to really get our head around this whole mess, and I'm going to just call it a mess, of masculine-feminine disconnect that we have in the world now. Because masculine and feminine interactions now are really at a very dysfunctional, in a very dysfunctional state. Even spiritual communities and yogis and people who should know better and who should understand that the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine are both sacred. It's not just the goddess is sacred and the man is and the masculine is the patriarchy. It's not that women are the goddess and men are the brutal dictators that have destroyed the earth, this cartoonish polarizing is really at the heart of it, or it's a very bad attempt to try to bridge the gaps and to try to reconcile the errors and the mistakes and the mistakes of the past, because we're coming out of the Kali Yuga, coming out of the darker ages where patriarchal protective forces were necessary to the detriment of all culture, to the detriment of women, to the detriment of men, to the detriment of peace, joy, love, beauty, God, consciousness, all of it. These patriarchal structures which allowed our species to survive, perhaps that wasn't the best choice. It could have still survived with the more feminine energies as well, but there was so much that was lost with the elevation of patriarchal structures that we're now evolving beyond. And so this evolution beyond that and to what comes next is not being helped, particularly in spiritual communities. Us as spiritual people who are supposed to know better need to not participate and not conflate and not bastardize sacred masculine and feminine by taking one portion of some kind of modern New Age ethic around patriarchal structures being bad and then contorting that into saying, yeah, and see, goddess is good, man is bad. All women are goddess, all men are warrior, destructive. No. Women are an expression of the goddess in its highest sense. Men are an expression of God in its highest sense. Divine masculine and divine feminine are like two wings of a bird. They're the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine, the sun and the moon, the night and the day. They are complementary opposites. And simply because the ones that have been in power abuse the power, like power is always abused, doesn't mean that we now stop thinking straight and thinking clearly and turn everything into a cartoonish distortion. So I'll be literal about what I'm talking about. I even see now so much destructive, like internet posts and again, I'm not talking about from people that I would expect it from, but I mean even from spiritual people in spiritual realms and all of this, where literally things. There was something circulating on, I believe it was Facebook a while ago, that it was this long article that said something to the effect that everything about masculine itself is toxic. Like literally everything associated with masculine energy is toxic. Everything associated with feminine energy is the goddess and is virtuous. So the only things that are virtuous are feminine. The only things that are toxic and destructive are masculine. There are no virtuous masculine traits. There is no enlightened masculine energy. All masculine energy is toxic. All feminine energy is divine. Again, this was getting cheered and shared and from people that I respect, women that I respect who are trained in yoga and tantra and all of this. They're not people who don't understand. There's people who worship Shiva, for example, and Vishnu and Krishna and all that, and they're saying this stuff. So this is dangerous. This is not helping anybody to get this wrong. There is sacred masculine. There is perverted, distorted masculine. There is sacred feminine. There is also distorted, destructive feminine. You have aggression, which men are obviously more overtly aggressive, and you have what we call passive aggressive. Women because they're modeling the feminine more, can tend to be more passive aggressive, so to speak, where it's not so overt, but it's covert. Guilt trip, withholding, moodiness, passive aggressive. They're both aggressive. They're both negative. They're both destructive. One is not the bastion where everything masculine is bad, everything feminine is right. And it basically, the sad part about it is it basically sets up this place where, quote, women are the goddess, and everything the woman does, the man should just worship. And if men would just worship women, all the world's problems would be solved. This sort of crazy polarizing. Men shouldn't be worshiping women. Worshiping the goddess is different than worshiping women. Because women are just as seduced by the illusion as men. Women don't need to worship men. If they want to worship the sacred masculine, they can worship Shiva. They can worship Vishnu, Krishna. Men can worship Kali, Durga. But a man and a woman who have incarnated and have embodied through their karma are not embodying the goddess in their lower elements. They are not. It's not that everything the woman does is the goddess, if the man were just smart enough to understand it. Again, I'm putting this out there because this is huge in our culture right now, especially in spiritual culture. And I'm talking about it now because, we're here to try to evolve these things now with Rahu going through Gemini and trying to get our balance back around these gender roles. And again, when men and women come together, not goddess and god, it's not like one is a goddess and if the man would just listen to everything the woman says, everything would be fine. No, that's not the way it works. Women are an expression of the goddess and men are an expression of God and the sacred masculine. And what we're trying to do in relationship is evolve these things beyond the egoistic, materialistic, fearful expression. And both have their own ways of doing it. And like I said before, we're all an expression of both. Men embody their masculine traits or are trying to embody their masculine traits much more, and their masculine traits are much more a matter of identity for men, and the feminine traits are much more a matter of identity for women. But we both also kind of express a dysfunctional part of both. We're all on an evolutionary path, so we need to be very careful in this cartoonish, new age gobbledygook that takes a kernel of truth that, well, that's why in India Shakti is so important and all women are Shakti and all men, and then, and all men just, don't realize that they're supposed to worship the goddess. Yes, worship the goddess, not woman. A woman is just as driven and deranged by her emotions and her negative emotions as men are. And again, where this gets tricky, if you're not aware, is then if you start looking in things like, especially this kind of New Age, neo-tantric stuff, especially by some of these male teachers, I'm not going to say their names, but who have been peddling for years now that men are supposed to be like Shiva and impenetrable and should be able, that the sign of how much masculinity the man has is how well he's able to tolerate anything the woman does, and the man shouldn't have his feelings on his sleeve, and that's the woman to kind of dance in a frenzied hysteria while the man is totally, okay, I get it. These are standards. This high tantric promise is very alluring, particularly in a world where women have been unempowered. And I am totally behind women being empowered and women embodying the goddess. Yes, I think most women will realize that most men are totally behind it, totally cheering them on. Like, yes, at least the men you want to be aligned with. Men are so much cheering for women to be powerful now, and we're so behind it. We are so behind it. But not at the expense of men being disconnected from their masculine virtues, and they're just as many. And the sad thing is the people who are putting forth this kind of stuff, and I'll just say the women, because I shouldn't, it's not just women, but it's men as well who are buying into these false ideas, are just sabotaging themselves, because when a woman wants a man to show up in his empowered glory, but then the man winds up getting utterly confused by all of this stuff and thinks that all of his masculine energy is just some toxic thing. So he winds up being this little, okay, anything to please you. And then the woman is like, yeah, right. Then the woman's level of attraction goes, as soon as the man is just utterly bewildered and afraid to be a man and afraid to express those masculine traits of clarity and purpose and direction, which is what the divine feminine wants. So we're all divine beings, and we need to get out of the cartoonish stereotypes and understand that, yes, you're a goddess. If you're a goddess, I'm a god. Let's remember that about each other, because that is true. Let's remember that about each other. When the man is too busy and he's not paying attention and he's careless and he's not as thoughtful, it might be because he's really distracted with a big thing that he's doing, and that's also an expression of his virtuous masculine nature. So, women have some patience for that, and women do. Women naturally have patience for things in ways that men don't usually. They embody that much more easily. Similarly, for men to be more patient when women are unpredictable and they're driven by the emotion and all of the things that are confusing for men to not understand. Because again, on some level, there's this disconnect between, we each do our gender thing much better than we do the opposite. Women naturally generate that sense of beauty and that sense of connection to others and that sense of harmony and that sense of accommodation that cares more for others perhaps than they do for themselves from moment to moment. This is why when they have to stand up for themselves, oftentimes women stand up for themselves in a way that's very hard for men to deal with, because it's a kind of dysfunctional way, because their masculine energy is not as embodied. Again, this is all Jungian analysis, actually. It's just in masculine, feminine. Women's masculine side is more of a shadow side. That's why it often comes out in a kind of fierce anger, because it's not as embodied. They embody the feminine qualities much more easily, much more naturally. Accommodation, helping others. Men, they embody the masculine things much more easily. It's all about me, where I'm going, what I'm doing. I'm not paying attention to what's going on. I'm not paying attention to the, how polite I'm being. I'm not paying attention to how I look, how everything looks, whether or not I'm being nice to everybody. Women notice this. And again, this is why men are so captivated. Again, I'm speaking very, very stereotypically, but this is why in general, men tend to be very captivated with women who naturally embody that beauty and that grace and that refinement of, sensuality and beauty and harmony with others. And women tend to be captivated with men for their purpose and their drive and their certainty and their clarity. So we're here to teach each other these things. And if we've incarnated with these karmas, then we're here to help each other, not say, well, one is divine and the other is not. So this is one thing I wanted to really talk about and to put out there for folks with this transit of Rahu going through Gemini, to try to feel your inner masculine, your inner feminine, and try to bring them into harmony with each other. Again, because the sign is Maituna, which means it's literally the sign of, again, it literally means like sexuality or intercourse. And again, what happens when we mate, or when what we're looking for in our partner is a kind of mirror of our shadow, feminine or masculine. Like me as a man, what I look for in a woman is something that matches the inner woman. But again, it's darker for me because it's not as integrated. So again, through relationship, man is trying to integrate their feminine. For woman, through relationship, they're trying to integrate their masculine and learn more about the self-directed area of life. Now again, these are general ideas. And of course, people always say, well, what about a man who has more of a feminine? What about a woman who has more masculine? Well, then that's what it is. And what that means is that often can create conflicts within the person as well, because this sense of identity will, is often then felt through something that's not as appropriate for their gender, like men who have an excessively sensitive side. This winds up being something that they're good at, but they don't necessarily feel as good about for themselves, especially if it's a straight man who is very, very sensitive and gets his feelings hurt really easily, and he's very much in that role. I mean, we know this. Of course, that's the way the person is made, but as an astrologer, for example, we would talk about that quite a bit. Just like women who have a much more developed masculine side. And they're more driven and focused and ambitious and in their work and whatnot. They can be very successful in their work and all that stuff. But then that part of them that feels disconnected or that might be difficult is the capacity to be receptive and to allow and to bond more with their feminine side. So these are things I just wanted to open up and talk about a little bit too, partly because I just talked about them in at the conference I just went to. I do a men's lodge at the Shakti Fest, and people should understand these are the things. This is the stuff that men are. We're aware of this, and we have a. We have an intuitive connection with each other. It's also very important, I think, that women have a tribe of sisters and females that they bond with, and men a tribe with their brothers. I almost think it's more important now that men really bond with a tribe of brothers, because men are definitely, men bond through activities like sports and all that stuff and activities, but also to really connect, the men who are hearing this, to really share with your brothers about things that have happened and that go on, and to, really ponder these things. So if people have some questions, you can ask some questions about anything I talked about. I did talk quite a bit about some of the transits of, what could be coming up with this Mars Rahu through the summer, and some intense explosive stuff for sure that, we should be aware of that's coming. And the way to work with it, to be more disciplined and to be more, be careful of getting into battles and arguments with people through a lot of the frustrations and whatnot. And yeah, somebody said time to hit the gym. For sure, this Mars Rahu, as it gets closer, especially being opposite Saturn Ketu as well, that's definitely that's something that you could really consider. Is this time for working out and working through that heat of and that sort of passion that's going to be coming up when Mars and Rahu get closer. So we'll wait to see if a couple questions come in, but I do look and say, for the most part, people understand sort of what I'm talking about, and somebody asked about tropical Vedic astrology. I don't know. Good astrologers can make their systems work. Who knows? There is no such thing as tropical Vedic astrology in Vedic astrology. Okay, if people are doing it now, that's what they're doing, but there is no tradition for that. So, again, as compared to sidereal astrologers, you're lumping things together. It's like saying, I've liked, these kind of French fries compared to these other. Why is that? Everything is different. We're all different people. So I'm glad you love what you love. Go ahead and do what you want. It's okay. But you should also not be confused and not misunderstand that in the Vedic astrology tradition there is absolutely zero application of using tropical signs. So again, it doesn't mean that people can't do it. I've always said that, but they're really not doing Vedic astrology. We already know it's a science and it works the way it works. So they're doing something else, and I'm glad you benefited from it. most of what I've seen is that the people who have benefited from that, it's because they're already used to their tropical signs, and then you bring in nakshatras and all. I think it's fine that people do that. What's not fine is there are some people, unfortunately, who just want to confuse everybody and make it out like the Indians made mistakes, and then they say a bunch of things that aren't true, and that's what confuses everybody. Plus the idea that there was ever anything called tropical Vedic astrology. There isn't. And it's also quite unscientific to just take things that are in the texts that were written a certain way, that were meant to be applied to a certain calculation, and then not use that calculation, but still apply everything in the texts. Again, this is what it's about. It's not like I want to get off on a big rant about that, but you should understand that's what it is. You have science books that were written at the beginning, there's the calculation for the zodiac. Simple. After that, you have all these things that you do to apply to that calculation. When people say, well, I'm going to do all these things, but then I'm not going to apply it to that calculation. Okay, I guess. So again, but if a practitioner, they're probably mainly just used to the tropical signs more, and it makes more sense, and that's fine. So, all right, so what else here? Well, the leaning toward war more has to do just with Mars and Rahu, and also being opposite the Saturn and the Ketu. And that's it's mainly the Mars Rahu, and also because we're also working up to eclipses, and so again, Mars Rahu conjunctions always bring the potential for war. Also, these nakshatras of Ardra. This section of the sky, Gemini and Sagittarius, are very, potentially cataclysmic. Okay, plus we have the eclipse shortly thereafter and all that. So that's again this. By the way, you can already see. It's not. You already see the energy. The United States government right now is beating war drums like we haven't seen in a long time. If you're not aware of that, you should check it out. Look in the news. They're almost trying to get into war in Venezuela. Now all these secret meetings about Iran and potential to move all these troops there. We see it. We see the momentum building, very similar to what it did in the Gulf War, before the Gulf War. So we see it. And the reason we're seeing it astrologically is because Mars Rahu getting close, especially the nakshatra of Ardra, and opposite Saturn Ketu. So somebody asked about their daughter's chart. I'm not looking at a chart, so just like I didn't read my chart, not really sure about that. What could she expect? Confusion. Worst day in June. So go back and listen. I talked about the days in a general sense. Someone said the tropical Vedic astrology trying to ruffle me. That's all right. It doesn't matter. I'm not ruffled. I don't mind explaining it. It doesn't bother me. I explain it so people can hear it. Look, I already know this stuff. I explain it so people can understand it. Okay, so it doesn't ruffle me. And it's good to explain it. It's good for people to understand. And it doesn't surprise me that someone might ask that. And so, so again, you can't do individual chart readings. What can someone expect? I'm not looking at someone's chart. So again, people are asking about how to avoid. You're asking for specific things. The 6th house is conflicts. Again, if you know what things are, you say how to avoid conflicts. I don't know. I'm not looking at your chart. I don't know what your conflicts are. I don't know what else is there. There's too many variables when people start asking about specific charts. This is where, again, you've probably seen me and every other astrologer when people start asking about some specific chart and they think they're even saying something specific. She has Gemini Cancer just like you. What should she expect? I don't know. I'm not looking at her chart. I have no idea. I don't know anything about anyone's specific chart, and I can't say anything about it. So that's all. It's just that I I understand, Marlene, Gemini rising. I get it. So I just talked all about Gemini and Rahu and Gemini. So listen to that. Other than that, I don't have anything else to say because you're saying, what can she expect? I don't know. Okay, so I just talked about Gemini rising, and Rahu in the first is about that identity as a Gemini. Okay? And so, by the way, we also talked about and I didn't even really mention it, but even other kinds of wars like trade war with China and other kinds of things like this is definitely big stuff. Again, there's just this preparation for battle everywhere. Okay, so we're seeing that, and that's what we have. So again, it's more just about transit through my 8th house, right? So what 8th house things are? What are they? So it's about the potential of having things destroyed and changed and transformed. Yes, I'm affected with Rahu through my ascendant. Ascendant is the first house in a person's identity. Again, I'll say it again. Okay? Ascendant is a person's identity getting shifted with Rahu around all the Gemini themes. That's the person's identity if it's their first house. Okay? And so, all right, so I think I'll just leave it there. And this was a lot going on. And now there's a lot of just specific things, natal moon, Sagittarius 6th house. Again, it's all revolving around wanting me to say something specific about something that's not specific enough, some specific chart. I'm just going to get redundant and sound like I'm repeating myself or frustrated or irritated, which I don't want to do because I'm actually not. But people always say, oh, you sound so irritated or frustrated now. But no, I just want to keep repeating myself, the same version of the same question, and people try to get it a little different. Well, people are very sly. What's your ascendant and my 6th house and my moon? Again, I'm not going to read charts. So this is why often taking questions is a little bit tricky, because it's always some question about reading a chart, which is some kind of thing in their chart, and I don't have the chart. That's all. So anyway, we'll leave it at that, and I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation. And I mainly wanted to talk about the things that are coming up and how we have to be cool, notice things, and again, what you should hope to know. And I told you a lot rather than worrying specifically about what it might be for you or your daughter or your this or your moon and that or this thing and that. Again, the most important things I said. These things I'm talking about are very, very, very important because they're going to be affecting your mind, other people's minds. Notice these things in the world and try to apply them, okay? And not think even that you need me to say a specific thing about the house and the this and the this and the that. If you want to do that, you can get readings and stuff like that. But even in readings, it often almost always comes back to very, very similar things that I say in these forecasts. I'll tell you right now, they're much more valuable than you probably think as far as what you might think is more important. If you ask one of these questions about your chart, I didn't answer it. One of the reasons I don't also is because it's probably not anywhere near as important as you think. Because again, there are so many other things too. There's dashas, there's this, there's that. There's so many other things. You're making it that important. It might not be that important at all in that regard. But the things I said I know are very important right now, and we can see them, especially if you use your mind and imagination to look at these things, not just literally, but metaphorically as well in your life, to see how it shows up that, the drums of war are beating. Not just in the world, but in your life, in one way or another, in some way. You know what they are. I don't need to see your exact chart to know what they are. You're going to be tempted to be triggered and fight and argue. Mars and Gemini, like I said. Mars getting close to Rahu, it could explode, like I said. Again, how valuable is it that you know these things are coming? So watch them very closely in your life. And again, this stuff is very, very powerful now, and we don't get into this portal very often where we got Ketu, Saturn tracking each other for 5 months, and then Mars also exactly opposing it. While we have these other crucial points with full moons in Scorpio and all this other stuff going on. A lot of treacherous, dangerous stuff, yes, in the world, but in your life as well. But the treacherous, dangerous stuff is also great opportunities and great portals into a deeper dimension. And I mean a deeper portal into things like the Kundalini and the power and facing all of this difficulty with courage and strength. Again, instead of what happens with this, when people get all, it's going to be bad, I'm going to be triggered. Well, you're going to be triggered. Welcome to life on Earth. You're not here to just be triggered, okay? This stuff can help you do the right thing beyond your triggering. That's why I talk about it like this, okay? So these are great opportunities, especially when you get the difficult energies, because they're the ones that give us the power to do that. That includes eclipses, Mars, Rahu, Saturn, Ketu, enormous possibilities. If you cannot get triggered and not, act like a jackass like we tend to do when these things happen and get angry and blow things up and make a mess out of the world, if you can stay, especially doing your yogic practices and staying on course and on track with things, enormous opportunities and growth is possible. Okay, so we'll have a whole bunch of other, I'll do some other videos here as well, and I appreciate everyone showing up, and I hope you have a good one. Oops.